People are who they are. Try to change them. Prepare to fail. My name is Richard Ackerman, and I'm a student of life. I spent a long time paying attention, just seeing what people do, what drives them to do what they do, the choices they make, and it's kind of baffling sometimes. I've worked in many industries. I've met quite a few people. And the one thing they all have in common is most often people are very proud of who they are. People, and though they might try to lead you to believe they are otherwise, they definitely like the choices they make. In the moment, a lot of it's instant gratification. I gotta tell you, it's easier to make a good choice when it feels good and is fun. People do not willingly change the way they think and behave. It's not something that they do. It's not readily available to them to make that decision, to make that change. Statistics prove that people aren't willing or able to change who they are, even when faced with consequences as harsh as prison time. Ask anybody who has been addicted to drugs. They don't make that choice very lightly, but it is made. And most often it feels like they've had that choice made for them. Their addiction takes over. The first case that I would like to talk about, the first point, is going to be a guy I know. There's no way to rewire him, as medically put. The statistics prove it. No effective method for that exists. Not today. The unsettling feeling comes when people need to make changes. How do I do it? What do I do? I can't tell you. I don't even know myself. But I've got to tell you, a fella that I've known for a very long time, he goes through his daily routine every day, and he does it under the influence of alcohol. I don't know that he can't cope or he's just not willing to. He's had some pretty interesting life choices that he's made. He drinks all the time, and as such, he's got multiple DUIs. The poor fellow got to the point where it became a felony for him, and he got thrown in prison. He did a couple years being a good boy, got out on parole. Out on parole, he did the right thing. He did exactly what he was supposed to. He was compliant. He showed up to all his meetings. He didn't drink a drop. Once he got off parole, though, can you imagine what he did? Can you just imagine the choices he made? It was from the parole officer's office, straight to the bar, got a take-home bottle after he did a couple shots, and just generally got back to where he was. All the time he spent changing his behavior. But it was just that. It was a behavior change. It wasn't a character change. He didn't make those changes because he wanted to be a different person. He made them to get out of the system that reined him in and took control of his life, because he thought he was doing fine, obviously. The turning point here in this point is that science says that people are, in fact, able to make those changes. Their choices are a function. It is a function of what they have observed and experienced throughout their lives. Through the use of counseling as an educational process, counseling psychologists are able to effectively make changes in the decision-making process of people under their care. As an effect of providing an environment conducive to learning, the students in question did in fact make positive choices. Their decision-making process was effectively changed. As it stands, they still have to want that change. A real, true desire to change. Nobody can force you to want it. Something not so easy to manifest. As humans see their own worlds as a reflection from their personal identity, making changes is not so easy. Brings up an interesting point about interpretation. Every individual in this world, they interpret the world differently than the next. That interpretation is based upon their own morals and values. It's also shaped and further defined by their own self-image. Their identity, from another angle, also is a consideration on their decision-making engine. A person's identity is shaped by everything that person has seen, heard, or otherwise experienced throughout their lives. But that isn't all of it. Their internal dialogue continues to define that identity. How does one change their internal dialogue? That's a good question. You gotta want it. You gotta want it real bad. You can't just reinforce the same behaviors and expect a change. You've got to want the change. The change has to be for you, by you, and of you. There's evidence that those who make very bad decisions, for example, prison inmates, that they can be rehabilitated. That is a rounding point that we're going to talk about a little bit. Rehabilitation. That is what the system actually calls the change in decision making. The system assigned that. It's the changing of thought and behavior patterns. As they are brought into the system, their suitability to re-enter society is evaluated at many points along their journey within the system. And that slope is a slippery one though, because as stated, the rate of recidivism is nearly as high as 2/3 of those prisoners actually returning to a life of crime. Back to wanting it. You've got to want the change. In conclusion, it is truly evident that as a whole, humans don't make changes to their personal decision-making engines very easily. For some, it takes a much more meaningful event than even prison time. A person has to truly want that change, and even then, some don't make the swing. In the end of the day, I've seen many people move through their lives, happily making many accomplishments. Some believe they're happy and manage to never accomplish anything above waking up in one piece every morning. But as a whole, people are a product of their own self-image and their identity, most of which are happy just as they are, be they an axe murderer or a saint. Thank you. Have a nice evening.